Melody has invited two guests. I have you guys. I'm going to bring the guests on, Ulysses and Kenny. And Melody's story is going to be on Case-Shiller. She'll explain what that is. She'll, go into what's going on with values. Is it useful? Is it not? But first, let me bring on Ulysses right here and Kenny. And Melody, please introduce your guests and take this sucker away.
Sure. So, Ulysses Awesome, you guys, Mr. Awesome on X Twitter. We also have Jordan Keckley here with us today, who goes by a different name on X Twitter. I'll let him talk about that if he wants to. But these are two of my colleagues that I talk to almost daily about employment, about construction, really about all of the macro news that we're getting out there. And so we kind of bounce ideas off of each other. And I wanted to bring them here because this week we got the Case-Shiller results and it's all-time high. And I don't know, Travis, if you're showing just just for a visual, the slide to see, there just looks like there's no room for this thing to go any higher. And so that's confusing because there's a whole bunch of other series out there. So what we wanted to do in this show today is really dive in to what the Case-Shiller is, what it's meant to track. And the idea is exactly what you said, Travis, to, kind of help you guys come to a conclusion as to whether you think that this tool, which did not call the last housing crash in any way, shape, or fashion, whether this tool is really helpful for us right now. And so welcome, Ulysses and Jordan. Ulysses, if you want to kind of jump in, just if you want to say a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then kind of tell us about the history of this series, I think that would be great.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks for having me on, first of all. So I am a contractor and a consultant in the construction and real estate world. My background has spanned commercial real estate, but the last few years, production home building, including for what was previously a top 10 in volume home builder in the United States. So I've got to bring that perspective to my analysis that I've been sharing, both online and through Macro Edge Research, which is a publication that we've been sharing a lot of information about where the economy's at. So with the Case-Shiller, one of the things that it gets used for, right, to tell us that the market's doing well, home prices have never been higher. But the reality is the Case-Shiller index, and there's three different versions of them. It's a composite index, and it's a bit of a lagging indicator because it's taking only what are paired sales. So in other words, they have to go through records showing a home sold, has it sold in the past? And then they match those two, and they're comparing the time periods. So it's not exactly, an apples to apples comparison. And the other big portion that is problematic to me is how much it measures. In fact, if you were to take those paired sales based on how many houses have sold, we're generally only covering 20 to 30% of the market that's out there. So it's not even the majority of the market that we're really measuring. It's a small fraction at any given point.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really bothers me about it, Ulysses, is it's a 3-month moving average. Like we just got this series is for March. However, it's going to include sales from November, for example. And it could actually be further back. Like, Los Angeles during COVID had over a year delay in recording deeds, which would have meant that for a full year, Case-Shiller, who uses LA data, would not have had any idea about what was going on. And so I think that, that, and it's a 3-month moving average. And also a big thing that, Ulysses, I'd love for you to just spend a second talking about is the fact that, it's a moving average. It's an index. It's not absolute price levels. If you could just talk about that a bit.
Yeah, it's not price levels. In fact, the way that they break it out is they have multiple decades of category. So they'll index it from 1990 to 2000, 2000, 2010, and 2000 and beyond. And all they're really doing is saying in the year 2010, the price that they're measuring is 100% of the price. So anything above that, increase or decrease, will show up as a percentage, right? So if the index is at 150, it's at 150% of what it was in 2010. But again, we're talking about lagging data. It's a moving average, so it's not the absolute price level. It's the 3-month average, and that continuously gets adjusted every 3 months. So what you had in, say, January, now that we're into month 6, has also been changed because of the way that they're calculating that average. So it's the continuous 3 months, not just a quarterly 3-month average.
Wow. Yeah. So that really changes things. You know, one thing that I've kind of noticed about it is if you think about, I've been thinking about when would we start to see the seasonal decline in Case-Shiller, because something that I did, you know, for my Substack and on X Twitter is looked at the 25-year kind of historical home price arc during the selling season throughout the year. And what you can definitely see is that there's a seasonal arc that happens, which is why maybe seasonal adjustments, someone thought they might make sense, but we can look at those things. We can look at that average and that history. And Travis, I don't know, I can bring up, it's one of those, it's a chart here, 1 second, or maybe not.
I got your screen up.
Okay. So if you look at the lower left-hand corner here at this 25-year average home price arc for existing homes and new homes, you can definitely see that, you know, we kind of peak up during the spring, summer season, and then kind of come back down. And so one thing that happened to me when I was going through a crisis in 8, 9, 10, 11, is every year we get super excited about, okay, home prices are turning around. But in reality, because people weren't looking at this seasonal arc, that's not what was happening. And really, what I have come to understand about a lot of these seasonal adjustments is what happens throughout the year. What the news stories are about is just them correcting the mistake they made or the assumptions they made at the beginning of the year. And so, you know, so we're basically looking at not real information and really more about adjustments to this model and to what they thought was going to happen. And so, you know, and we will not see for the Case-Shiller, in my opinion, home prices start to come down until probably after the election, just because of the way it's built. But would you agree with that? Or
I would. Typically, any decline in that or slowdown, it's going to be lagging, and it's generally anywhere from 3 to 6 months. And given the spring being the sort of the peak season, it would be normal for most indexes to show that prices are increasing at the moment. So it's not necessarily looking at what's happening; it's looking at what was happening. And the other thing about it, their methodology that's problematic, is it's a composite of the American Community Survey, which is basically asking homeowners what they think their home value is, and then the 10 and 20 city composite index of the Case-Shiller. So it's really not measuring all of the same variables like you would sales or price. So it's bound to lag, regardless if it goes up or down. It's never projecting an accurate depiction of what's really happening in the market right now.
yeah, and I think the other thing that an index does is it's trying to show you activity more than anything else. And I think that if we think about what was happening, at the beginning of the year, we had just had the December pivot by Powell, and every person out there that talked about housing, except for a few of us, was like dancing on tables. They were like, oh my gosh, home sales are going to go crazy. Zillman, they came out with one of the most aggressive forecasts. I couldn't even believe it. And so, I think when that happens, then sentiment changes, even if the facts on the ground haven't changed. And that creates, some demand. And we've seen a lot of that demand has been more in the top 10, top 20% for very expensive homes. And so I think that as rates kind of, did not go down as people expected, that this is when you're going to see that sentiment shift. But again, we won't see any of that coming into the Case-Shiller until likely around or right after the election. So.
Agreed. I think if you look at the post GFC, wasn't it in 2010 when it actually started declining, the Case-Shiller index?
I am trying to remember the exact year. We could probably see it here on this series. It took time. It took a lot of time, and it didn't happen, during those peak years. And it took several years. I think we had a 5% decline, like you're saying, right around I think that first part, like around 2009, but I'm not exactly sure. I can't see on this right
Sure,
now.
that's
If
okay.
somebody can bring it. Yeah. Um, but I wanted to kind of turn it over to Jordan. Jordan, you do a lot of digging into the bowels of data, be it from the BLS or whatever you can get your hands on, which I love. You were going to talk to us a little bit about Nashville when it comes to the Case-Shiller.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, everybody. Again, my name is Jordan Keckley. And I just sort of kind of stumbled into real estate. I'm to give you a bit of my background. I'm a healthcare guy, by day, and this whole real estate thing was kind of just a side hustle where I was just consulting for some small in-town developers. But I started my career out. I guess you could say like I'm a recovering CPA. So like that's probably where all of these being into the weeds things sort of come from. But thankfully, like that was probably like the first 5 years of my career, and thankfully I don't do that sort of work anymore because it is like, it's mind numbing. But yeah, I mean now I'm more in the healthcare consulting space. We're working with hospitals and health systems, and it's primarily on things like their strategic initiatives. And a lot of that is basically they're just trying to figure out the lay of the land in their market, what's private equity doing in the space, things like that. And in order to sort of put something meaningful like that together, you kind of have to get into these government databases or, other various data sets, and especially demographics. So that's, that's the real big connection, in my opinion, between healthcare and real estate and that whole space is really the demographic piece of this. So that's kind of where I come from in this equation. And I just like started a Twitter account because I was just kind of annoyed at what I perceived as sort of all this misinformation out there. And I only know so much. I joined Twitter to learn too, and I've obviously met a bunch of smart people on X, I guess you could say. But yeah, like when it comes to, and again, I agree with everything Ulysses said. It's a flawed. I consider the Case-Shiller to be flawed. I mean, the fact that it's a valuated index, like we're talking real estate valuated index, and the value piece of that is based on the average sales price. That by design is going to be biased to the upside versus say like a median. That kind of drives me nuts. The thing that people need to think about when it comes to I just think of this in general. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, but when it comes to this stuff in particular, you need to be paying attention to the details. People just don't like to do that. Well, case in point, I'll talk about Nashville as an example, and specifically Davidson County. So we know that the Case-Shiller is focused on existing single-family sales only. It's a repeat sales index. Well, if I just look at something like the stock of homes in Davidson County, based on estimates, there's roughly 340,000 homes, total homes in Davidson County. Well, I mean, there's different types of homes. I mean, you could have, HPR, detached or attached homes. It could be, multifamily. It could be duplexes. Heck, it can be even like mobile homes. So when I look at how that's changed over time, and I guess let me see if I can share my screen so you can.
Just a note on that while you're looking, the 20 city and 10 city indexes and the Case-Shiller, they only measure single family detached homes. So we're talking about if your house is a single family home with a yard and it's not connected, so it's no condos, no townhomes. So once again, it's even shrinking the footprint of what is actually measuring.
Exactly. Okay, so here we go. Can you guys see those two graphs? Okay, it looks like we can. So this is basically what I was just referring to. And the top graph is the actual level of homes in Davidson County. And then below that is just the share, just the distribution of homes. And when you look at that, what you're basically noticing, especially on the bottom graph, is that basically you just have a bunch more multifamily in Davidson County. So is the Case-Shiller, first off, the 10 or the 20 city index is not going to pick up Nashville. It's not in there. But we have now a smaller share of homes that would meet the qualifications to even be in the Case-Shiller. So there's all this nuance to it. And even when you look at this data at a much more granular level, like say by zip code, I mean, downtown Nashville, Melody, I mean, we just went on, the tour around town. I mean, downtown Nashville is just nothing but condos and apartments now.
Right.
I mean, that's what it is. So this is not representative, or the Case-Shiller would not, in theory, be representative under those circumstances, at least how it's currently structured. So I guess I can stop sharing. Let me see. There may be one other. Oh, crap.
So while you're doing that, Jordan, I think that is such a good point. It matters which cities are looking at. As people talk about often, real estate is local. Well, if that's the case, how can this series actually really represent what's happening across the country? And then to your point, you look deeper, and if you're only looking at single family home, like detached sales, those condos in some areas, condos are most of what transacts in a market. You think about Miami, for instance. So are we ever so we know the condo crisis in Miami is happening as we speak. And if for those of you that don't know what that is, essentially a law was passed after Surfside, the collapse there, that people can no longer put off making repairs to these condos that were aged. And so what's happening is they have a deadline. They have to get these inspections, and then they have to assess their tenants, these condo tenants, with how much money it's going to take to get everything up to code. And you're seeing this all over social media. You're seeing it all over mainstream media, that people are having to move, having to leave because they can't afford these assessments. Well, how on earth, for anyone who's been to Miami, and it's very similar to what kind of Jordan is saying about Nashville, so much of your housing stock is condos. How on earth could the Case-Shiller ever give you any indication of what's really happening in Miami? And it can't, is the answer. So that's why it's, you guys, you got some geeks on this show right now. We're all geeks, and we like digging in, but this is why, because you take or accept something as fact, but when in reality you look deep into how it's being captured, it's questionable. It's meant to serve as kind of a, its own sort of product. It's not meant to tell you what's about to happen in the housing market. But Jordan, go ahead with what you were.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And So all I'm doing now is I'm just going to come at basically the same thing, but just from a different angle in terms of like, what properties are out there for sale. And this is Redfin data, real estate data. This now is showing the Nashville MSA, and it's the exact same information, top and bottom. The only difference is how it's cut. So as you can see on top, the bulk of homes, and I probably could have done a better job with my color scheme here, but the bulk of homes sit in Davidson County. That's why I wanted to talk about that, front and center, because population, the bulk of the population sits in Davidson County for the MSA. Obviously the homes are going to follow the population. But look, the same, you can look at that same information below. It's literally the same thing, but now it's cut by the type of property. And so when you look at that over time, well, look, there's more condos on the market, right? Well, then you could actually look at individual counties, and you would see, for Davidson County, I'll just cut it real quick. See what that looks like. Look how many more condos are now part of inventory. That's just basically since 2016, it's just been increasing, outside of COVID, obviously. But these are all sort of like the things that, at least when I'm looking at something like Case-Shiller, I'm just, it's going to be biased because of how it's designed. And I know there's even been questions about things like Redfin's index and their weekly data series and their monthly data series. And it's just, it's all so confusing, admittedly. So, but you have to pay attention to those details if you're going to make sense of it, in my opinion.
Totally agree. And thank you for bringing it back to Redfin, because they do something, they also look at county records, and that's often why their data is updating after. So you can catch it at a point in time and you can go back in a week and it's different. and this is why, it's so, in my opinion, it's so misleading. And to talk about an all-time high that's temporary, for instance, until there's more data kind of put into the mix, it's just misleading. And like you say, it's very confusing. But I feel like all of these series could do a much better job at telling you what they actually capture. They've they're being weaponized as tools, especially during this election cycle, in my opinion. So, but Travis, we could probably take some questions now.
Well, I have a quick question. Maybe this is a test. Maybe it's not. Depends on your answer. So, a couple of points that you guys highlighted about Case-Shiller determining the direction of the housing market that I really appreciated, and I hope the viewers understand this, that it's a composite. They're not even looking at pricing values. That's insane. And also, they're only counting SFRs. Now, SFRs, single-family residences, or SFH, single-family homes, they are important. But there are some markets that have over 50% of condos and townhouses inventory. And so there is not an attention to detail when it comes to Case-Shiller. And so my question for you both is, and this is I know the answer, I have my own personal answer, but being that you're saying pay attention to the details, we know Case-Shiller is not details. And we know seasonality is a factor, regardless of we're in a crash cycle or not. Seasonality does play a role. What is the better method, in y'all's opinion, for the consumer to go to determine actual value and prices? What method can people use to determine that accurately?
Yeah, well, I think, doing some research on the market that you're looking into and what actual sales have been is always going to be the best method. You want to know exactly what's gone on, pay attention to the trends and look at a longer time frame. I think one thing that we've all experienced over the last 4 years is an enormous distortion in transaction activity, right? And from an explosion of sales to now sales are basically lowest level we've had back at COVID lows. So you want to be making sure that you're looking through that whole cycle where prices have been, so that you're able to make your own decision on valuation. Um, that would be my recommendation if I was to give one. I would never use the Case-Shiller in doing a market analysis or discussing, basic potential price points for the developers that I consult with, because it's not data that I can say, here's hard facts, hard sales in the market.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, man. The hard sales for the viewers, that's a sell. We refer to that as a comp, a comparable sell. And really, you want to go hyper local. You want to go to the neighborhood. You want to go to the subdivision. And what I do as a realtor is I go back to 2020 and I look at all those cycles. I look at the run ups. That's kind of how I gauge whether or not it's a good or great deal. So thank you. I'm done with my questions. Jack.
So my question really for anybody on the panel here, we've seen a couple of trends over the last year or so. The lower pricing levels have pretty much been frozen in place, right? We have entire generations, the Zoomers and the Millennials, have been frozen out of the housing market because of the high payments and the stagnant wage growth. And so we've seen a lot of stats like median home prices going up because more of the deals are happening in the higher end of the home price spectrum, because those are the only people who can afford. Maybe interest rates aren't so important up there because you have more cash buyers at the higher end of the spectrum buying more of the top tier homes. So would that trend, could that be sending false signals via Case-Shiller to make it look like the average home price is rising when really all it is just more deals happening with more expensive homes while fewer are happening with the less?
So, yeah, I mean, I'll try and address that. I mean, I think just if you're thinking of like mean and median, in this environment, when you have something that is designed to valuate a market and it's based on the average value of a home times the number of units within a given area, and that's how you're coming up with a value weight, that by design is actually going to push it higher, especially in an inflationary backdrop that we find ourselves in. So, I mean, even things like mean versus median are important, but are most people looking at those things? Not necessarily. And yes, just in general, the market, our economy is just, people say this all the time, but like when you get into the weeds of all of these different economic data series, at least in my opinion, it is extremely bifurcated, period. There are people doing really well, and then there's people who aren't doing really well. And those are like the blue collar folks primarily. It's also just younger people. If you think about younger people as an example, the home ownership rate for them is like 40%, which means the remaining 60% are renters. The unemployment rate for that cohort is actually higher than just the headline U3 number that you see. And so, yeah, I mean, you do have this scenario where it really is like the haves and the have-nots. So that's what I'm seeing, at least in the data.
Okay, you guys, just for the sake of time, if you guys don't mind, I have one question from the viewers. I think this is a great question. It may not fit into this segment well, but it is great. And either one of you can answer. Just jump in or raise your hand and I'll call on you like the good teacher that I try to be. Does anyone else think that the dollar bouncing around destroys the global economy first and then it hits America? What are you guys' thoughts on that? Yeah, Ulysses.
Yeah, I think we are obviously going to be the last one to get hit. Parts of Europe are already in recession. Part of Japan seems to be in recession now. GDP is going negative. They're having their own dollar crisis. It's typically how recessions have worked, and I think we're close to one. If not in one already, and we know that they get backdated, but part of the issues we've had with the dollar and devaluation, or however you want to look at it, volatility, I don't look at it the same way a lot of other people do comparing to other currencies. Look at the housing market actually is what I use as a gauge. And when we have prices going up rampantly, people are valuing their dollars less than they were prior. And now that we're sort of hitting the bottom in sales, it's kind of the opposite. Now everyone goes, okay, well, I need my dollars. So when people start really caring about that, then yeah, we're kind of at a bottom point or recession, right? We don't have access to credit, and people care more about their dollars. So yeah, take that how you want, but I definitely think that's recessionary.
And Kenny, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I just keep it like Ulysses said, just with the housing market at this point. It's just an inflation hedge. I mean, yeah, we're going to continue to devalue our currency. I'm no Forex expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I mean, that's what's happening. I mean, it's basically turned into this speculative investment vehicle or an inflation hedge. And yeah, that's where we're at. It's unfortunate. So,
And before we let you guys go, and starting with you, Kenny, can you tell the viewers where they can find your information?
oh, sure. Yeah. Over on Twitter at KennyCap PhD is where you can find me behind the mullet.
Behind the mullet. And Ulysses, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can find my writings and research regularly at macroedge.net. And you can also reach out via at Mr. Awesome on Twitter and get a hold of me that way as well.
Okay. All right. Melody, do you want to say anything else before we let him go?
Just want to thank you guys for coming on today, sharing your expertise. You know, I understand, guys, as a data geek myself, this stuff can seem pretty boring and hard to understand, but the overarching message is that the details do matter, and we should all be diving in more when these things are being weaponized for a specific narrative, and especially in an election cycle. But thank you guys for coming on.
Thank you all very
Thank
much.
you.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.